Welcome to the making of Led Zeppelin. Just a quick recap of the previous installments. Episode 1 discussed the Yardbirds breakup and how the new Yardbirds coincided in London. Episode 2 was a deep dive into their brief tour of Scandinavia in early September 1968. And now, welcome to Episode 3, the recording sessions. Enjoy. It was Wednesday, September 25th, 1968. The same day Led Zeppelin ended 12 years later, but this time away from tragedy into building a discography. In the middle of River Thames's path, the band gathered at Olympic Studios for a 6-day, 36-hour recording schedule. The facility opened its doors in the late 50s, but was located to Barnes, a southwest district of London. The former cinema and TV studio was now a rock and roll laboratory. Most recent albums recorded there included both the Rolling Stones' Satanic Majesty's Request and Beggar's Banquet, with the latter to be released in December. Jimi Hendrix also worked on a couple of albums. Access Bold as Love was recorded entirely at Olympic Studios, whereas his soon-to-be-released third album, Electric Ladyland, was only partially completed there. Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones had previous Olympic studio experience, with no introduction necessary, while Jones himself was the Graham Goldman thing. Recording PJ Proby's album there in late August 1968 was a great trial and error for the new Yardbirds, as it gave Jimmy precious insight on their studio sound, especially the drums. An experienced recording engineer was called in for the job. Glyn Johns was born in Surrey, more specifically Epsom, which was the neighborhood a young Jimmy Page moved into, so as you'd think, they knew each other back from their teens. Glyn Johns' name was synonymous with British rock, working as engineer for mostly IBC Studios London. His resume by 1968 was just perfect for Jimmy Page's requirements. The latest Rolling Stones' albums, Traffic's debut, Steve Miller Band's layered textures in Children of the Future, and the Pentangle's crisp acoustic guitar sounds featuring Bert Jansch and John Renbourn. Glyn Johns agreed to record the new Yardbirds, and according to Peter Grant's book, he thought he'd get a royalty production credit, but Jimmy had other plans. Even in the middle of the lightning tour of Scandinavia, Page was set on producing the band himself, and also do something unprecedented for a rock guitarist without a record label behind his new group. Finance the album from his own pocket and savings. This money up front would mean less trouble later on, as no record label could try to recoup initial investments outside of marketing and distribution. Page financing the master recordings was a significant step ahead of his peers, whose debut album funding typically came from a producer or label, tying them down from the start. To have a musician take the lead here speaks of Jimmy's confidence and determination with the new Yardbirds. Page's businessman approach made him stand out from the competition, a smart man whose talents went beyond the fretboard. The total recording studio bill was £1,757, some $4,200 in 1968. These numbers in today's money would be approximately £31,000 or $39,000. And just to put things in perspective, a 1968 Jaguar XJ6 cost around £2,200, which was about £443 less than the cost of producing Led Zeppelin 1. Studio vibes on the 25th were a continuation of the spirit of Scandinavia. They knew what they wanted, and according to Page, worked with ruthless efficiency, no rushing but keeping the eye on the clock. That Wednesday session was one last rehearsal before the red light came on, and according to some sources, they did a run-through or warm-up of Garnet Mims's As Long As I Have You, spontaneous release and just go for it. John Bonham took his blue Slingerland kit with a Ludwig 400 supraphonic snare. Now, a never-ending dispute exists between Glyn Johns and Jimmy Page over drum recording innovation credits on the album. I recommend watching Rick Beato's fantastic video on this topic for a detailed explanation and examples. They basically use 3 mics, 2 U47 overheads, one on the snare, and one in front of the bass drum. Now, the reason I am on Jimmy Page's side on this one is the fact that there's nothing on Glyn Johns' discography past 1969 that sounds like John Bonham, while I think Page managed to capture Bonzo's magic for the next 7 albums, thus his obsession of changing engineers so no one could take credit for Led Zeppelin's sound. It was down to Jimmy, the rock and roll producer. I have a theory about Page's inspiration for his drum recording ideas. We know he was fed up with rock drummers sounding like cardboard on vinyl, but we also know he was a cultured man whose time in art school was not wasted. Jimmy paid attention to many art forms, including various styles of music. He didn't listen to records like an average musician, but as a listener and producer. He's said to be an admirer of the great Polish composer Krzysztof Penderecki, with one of his pieces inspiring Page's violin bow sounds. I mention this because I suspect Jimmy wanted to bring 60s jazz recording techniques into rock and roll, following the footsteps of innovators like the great American recording engineer Rudy Van Gelder. The way Van Gelder captured the live feel of instruments was revolutionary. Van Gelder, of course, was highly protective of his methods, which elevated already groundbreaking performances to places of audiophile perfection. His work allowed audiences to not only praise the virtuosity of the musicians, but also enjoy a jazz record as the closest thing to a live show in their living room. This intimacy with the music was something 60s rock and roll struggled against. Recording John Bonham with overheads and allowing his bass drum to breathe gave the instrument space, capturing its real identity. This highlights the musician's personality and what they bring to the table. If a great musician's sound is in their hands, a great listening experience is in the ears. So why not present rock and roll as it really was on stage? Crystal clear cymbals, thumping grooves, and energy that demands your attention. Led Zeppelin 1 achieved all that. John Paul Jones was most likely using his studio amp of choice, an Ampeg B15-9, along with his 1962 Fender Jazz Bass, a 1960s Honor Electro piano, and the studio's Hammond M100 organ. Robert Plant brought a Honor chromatic harmonica and worked on his breathing technique as much as he could. Jimmy Page used his Dragon Telecaster for most of the material, with some exceptions as we'll see later on. His amp remains one of the holy grails for guitarists around the world, a Supro Coronado 1690T. No delay, no echo effects were used in front of the amp. Effects were later added during the mixing phase through an EMT plate reverb, where the sound ran through the device and microphones would capture the end result. There was also the aid of a Leslie speaker that was used for additional contour on fast guitar solos. Now, recording sessions were not without some minor problems, as according to Peter Grant's book, Bonham could be a handful and misbehave sometimes, leading to Peter's threats of physical assault if Bonzo didn't follow Page's instructions. Peter Grant was the enforcer, and Jimmy Page was the wizard. Second day at Olympic Studios, September 27th, began at 11 p.m. The starting point for Page and Plant's Painborn House meeting back in July 1968 was just natural to be the first real track laid down on tape. The New Yardbirds doing Babe I'm Gonna Leave You was the sixth time the song was recorded, after American songwriter Ann Breeden came up with it back in 1959. Page and Plant's take was mostly inspired by Joan Baez's approach, going for introspection and deep melancholy. Page played a Gibson J200 acoustic guitar that belonged to producer Mickey Most. It's quite similar to the one Page used on the Julie Felix show 1970. Now, Jimmy was quoted saying Most didn't lend him this guitar past the first album when he realized he wouldn't be a producer for Zeppelin. 8 tracks were used in the mix, including backing vocals and additional electric guitar add-ons. Up to 9 takes of the song were tried out on September 27th.
Baby, I'm gonna leave you. I got the Attention.
The song opens up with a descending bass line of A, G, F sharp, F, and E, reminiscent of the Andalusian or popular flamenco scale. One of the most difficult things about this number is not muting the first and second string with your picking hand. Now it's fascinating to realize how this guitar idea was in the air back then, as both Page and George Harrison picked up on the same frequency. While My Guitar Gently Weeps had a very similar motif, with its earliest demos dated July 25, 1968. Final takes for this Beatle number were done in early September, just as the Yardbirds headed out for Scandinavia, with Babe I'm Gonna Leave You already in their set. It seems Page and Harrison recorded variations on the same intro without realizing it. So back to the new Yardbirds' song. They move into a staccato attack A minor, A7th with a sinister D minor add 9 chord for a bouncing back effect. The quick interlude moves around the A root note, while Jimmy plays a slide effect on a pedal steel guitar beneath the acoustic motif. Then we go into a heavy chorus where Jimmy's chord choices are interesting. Notice how he varies these chords, C with bass note G and D7 with F sharp for a slick and jazzy feel to it. Electric guitars were added on the heavy section, playing 2 chromatic notes on every pulse that augments the already dramatic piece into absolute despair.
I can hear it calling.
Small acoustic guitar solo overdubs bring some Spanish influences to the mix, along a very flamenco-inspired finale of F and E chords. The last bit is a descending bass line sequence of C sharp, C, B, and B flat for a nice contrast of intentions similar to the orchestra feel on the Moody Blues' Nights in White Satin. The song's first take on September 27th was key in taming the band's explosive nature. Robert Plant trying to control his enormous power next to John Bonham's frenetic drumming, waiting for the signal to come in.
Baby, I'm gonna leave you. Woman, that's what it's calling me. Back.
Now, much has been said of Bert Youngstress' influence on Page's guitar acoustic work, but there seems to be another artist that inspired the production side of things for Babe I'm Gonna Leave You. Mason Williams' Classical Gas was a rare instrumental victory in 1968 off his phonograph record, released back in February. While the single entered the charts on September 3rd, it was already an omnipresent tune in musician circles, especially guitarists. As a former classical guitar student myself, I've always found harmonic similarities between Page and Williams. From the opening A minor and G to that open D minor add 9 tension chord, the success of Classical Gas contributed to the public's perception and openness to Jimmy Page's Light and Shade. Babe I'm Gonna Leave You's outro provided working grounds for Stairway to Heaven's intro and concept. The song was performed throughout 1969, but it didn't survive the setlist after 1970 for several reasons. They added more acoustic numbers, live versions never fully captured the essence of the studio cut, and well, Stairway to Heaven happened. It was rumored the band wanted to do Babe I'm Gonna Leave You for their 1977 tour with Jimmy Page on a pedal steel guitar you can see on this photograph. The idea didn't go through, and it would take many years for Robert Plant to premiere it on his solo band shows around 1993, the same year for Coverdale Page and their single Take Me for a Little While, filled with many style references to Babe I'm Gonna Leave You. Page and Plant revisited this Zeppelin number 1995 through 1998. Fun fact, Chicago's 25 or 6-4 was heavily, very much inspired by Babe I'm Gonna Leave You's heavy section. The band recorded this in August 1969, and you can't deny the Led Zeppelin influence. How no lawsuits took place is a miracle. A 1962 Muddy Waters recording with lyrics by Willie Dixon and guitar work by double-neck legend Earl Hooker. The great innovation for this blues number was overdubbing vocals on top of the instrumental jam with slide guitar and Waters and unison. It was a hit single and highly influential for many British guitarists. The Yardbirds feature a small portion of it on a live cut by the name of New York City Blues. But it was of course the Jeff Beck Group, the band who put their version on record for their July 1968 release, Truth. Produced by Mickey Most, with Rod Stewart on vocals, and John Paul Jones himself playing the organ. We can speculate why Jimmy wanted to record a New Yardbirds' version, but it was the right move, as like with other numbers on Led Zeppelin 1, it was a major sonic improvement over a previous attempt. There's plenty of ambience room that takes you inside the studio, making the most of a stereo recording. I'm a big fan of Jeff Beck, the guitarist, but it has to be said, while his group had the chops, Page had vision. Jimmy, the producer, probably sent a personal message to Beck's producer, Mickey Most. This is how you do it, man. Jimmy made the most out of it. Not only did they pull back on the tempo to deepen the blues effect, but every element feels heavier. Bonham's restraint and control here is incredible, but the secret weapon is John Paul Jones. Both electric bass and organ parts create the perfect setting. He makes this slow blues cook. Robert Plant's harmonica steals Big Thunder, but Jimmy somehow managed to match that with a mean guitar solo that keeps building and building. Speaking of which, Page changed guitars for this one. Someone was trying to sell him a Gibson Flying V, and he decided to use it at Olympic Studios. It explains the warm humbucker sound on the recording and the extra crunchiness on the fuzz, which led to breaking the amp midway through the song. It was a saturated signal, heavy on intention, and also it was Jimmy's first time with a Gibson guitar for a Led Zeppelin recording. Now Page didn't keep the guitar and it later switched hands. Keith Richards used it at Hyde Park less than a year later. You Shook Me was performed as a standalone number throughout Led Zeppelin's early tours until October 1969, including a strange TV playback spot on West Germany's Beat Club in March that same year. As their setlist got more ambitious, You Shook Me services were no longer needed in favor of long Whole Lotta Love medleys. Official releases include 3 versions on Led Zeppelin's complete BBC sessions and the Paris Olympia concert bonus disc from the 2014 remaster series. The song made a brief cameo appearance on the Whole Lotta Love medleys of 1971 and 1972. Then it was just down to split-second references during In My Time of Dying, 1977. Third day of recording at Olympic Studios saw an organ and acoustic guitar experiment around an A minor harmony, which makes you wonder if this was planned as a sort of introduction for Baby I'm Gonna Leave You. Page's guitar technique here has some traces of Spanish tremolo techniques. Think Francisco Tárrega's Recuerdos de la Alhambra. These bits didn't make the final cut, but the organ solo itself sounds like a proper warm-up for Your Time Is Gonna Come.
Oh, could you make one really long chord at the beginning so we can fade it in?